Yeah, sorry that we're agreeing on so many things, folks. One thing that we definitely do agree on is that the one of the great Hart victories of all time was the 2011 right winger of the Anaheim Ducks, Mr. Corey Perry.
Corey. That bastard.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of Hockey Talkies. I am Taylor with my co-host here, Hunter, and today we're going to be talking about NHL awards, the histories of the trophies, and who we think is going to win the trophies this season. So I think we're going to start off with the lower tier awards.
Yes, the more worthless awards, the ones that nobody cares about.
The awards that guys don't want to win.
Yeah, they really don't want these, and they're actually usually ashamed to get them. So,
well, he said we're joking, but I remember this is a while back now. Pavel Datsyuk won the Lady Byng like 3 or 4 times in a row, and then I'm pretty sure he got in a fight near the end of the season just to so he wouldn't win it again. So there are some awards that guys maybe don't.
Well, I remember Don Cherry. I watched. I used to watch those Rock'em Sock'em hockey videos. Or DVDs. I guess they were VHS at one point. They date back to
I used to watch them on VHS.
Yeah, I had. It was the one during the lockout.
That's the best one.
Yeah, because he covers just it's just this
like
boatload of highlights basically. And the 2005 lockout, I should specify. And he was talking about Joe
there's only
Sakic.
been 7 lockouts.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, it's tradition. It's death, taxes, and lockouts. But he was talking about Joe Sakic because he loves Joe, right? I mean, Don loves Joe. Big surprise, everybody loves Joe Sakic. But the main point of this is that in this video, he was complimenting Joe Sakic's traits, specifically his shot, primarily, because he had that wicked release, and it shows this slow motion clip of him, his snapshot, the stick bending at
probably the
90
best
degrees.
wrister in the league for a significant period of time.
Well, yeah, because apparently his dad, the way Don Cherry described it, I don't know how true this is exactly.
Don never lies.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's why he's still not in Canada.
No!
But Joe would shoot pucks in the basement of their house or something like that, like so many kids did.
Sure.
He would hit the wall of the basement, and his dad, if he heard the sound of pucks hitting the wall stop, he would yell down, "Joe, what are you doing?" And then he'd keep shooting. So, basically, what I'm assuming there, and again, Joe can correct me. I'll call him later and we'll find out. But I'm assuming
if we have the time.
Yeah, if we have the time. I don't know. I'm pretty busy. But if Joe, I guess one day decided, "Hey, Dad, I want to go the distance," his dad's like, "Okay, well, you got to work on a couple of things, and one of them's going to be your shot. And if you want to have a good shot, here's what you have to do." So, Don Cherry in the video mentions that Joe Sakic won the trophy. I don't know how many times he won it, but he won it at least once. And the way Don describes it, he says, and Joe has a Lady Byng trophy, and I won't hold that against them.
Which is, imagine my shock.
Yeah, classic Don.
Yeah.
But
I think, looking through some of the guys that won it here, Gretzky won it, I think, 4 or 5 times. Mm-hmm. Bobby Hall won it, which is ironic.
Mm-hmm.
Sakic won it in 2001. Dimitra, RIP.
Yeah.
So, and then, Datsyuk, like I mentioned. So, it's one of those awards that it's kind of okay, this guy is a really good player, and he didn't get that many penalty minutes. So am I wrong there?
It's defined as the most sportsmanlike player in the league, right, basically. And I think that...
But that's completely subjective, though, is what I'm getting at.
Yes.
So
they're not
easy
literally...
to just kind of look at it okay, well, this guy...
Well, I guess maybe the best way to put it, actually, and I think, and again, if we look at the description here... Lady Byng Memorial Trophy, given to the player adjudged to have exhibited the best type of sportsmanship and gentlemanly conduct combined with a high standard of playing ability. So that's why guys like Joe Sakic and Pavel Datsyuk and Wayne Gretzky would win the trophies, because they kept their penalty minutes down and weren't known, I'm assuming, didn't get suspended during the season in which they won it. While also being... Yeah, I would assume that getting a suspension immediately negates you.
But what I'm getting at, though, is okay, so you don't have that many penalty minutes. Is that constitutes gentlemanly play? That means you're sportsmanlike, or it just means that you're disciplined, right?
Yeah, I mean it might be partly reputation based as well.
Yeah.
I think it's an impressive trophy to win in a sense, because it's really hard. Think about anybody who's listening here who's played a hockey game and has taken a penalty. how easy it is to take a penalty. Now imagine you're playing.
I've taken like 4 penalties in my life.
I don't take a ton of penalties, but there have been years where I've taken more than others out of spite. And again, it depends on how I'm feeling.
I took a penalty on you one time.
It was
I'm fatter than you.
Yeah.
He skated into me and fell over, and the ref was like, interference.
Friggin' rolled right over me. Like, imagine though, like playing in the NHL, you know, if that's even possible to imagine, and you know, you have to like prevent some of the best players in the world from scoring goals, and you have to do that without taking a penalty, or even just like be involved in a physical play, and not take a penalty. Like it's tricky to do. Most guys don't get 100 penalty minutes a year, but most guys get at least like 30 to 50 in a season. I think Ryan O'Reilly, I think it was last year, because I think he won it last year or the year before.
He won it like I have the list in front. I don't know this, but he won it in 14.
Really?
Yeah. Last year was McKinnon, Barkov, Carlson, William Karlsson, Goudreau, Kopitar, Hoodler, then O'Reilly.
I just remember seeing a clip of like O'Reilly getting a minor penalty, and it was like his first one in weeks or something like that, and it became like this. I think it was a YouTube clip or something, because it was kind of funny. But it's impressive that players are able to not take penalties while playing the game, and I think it's we have a trophy for it as it happens. It's kind of amusing. We have a trophy for this, but we don't have a trophy for assists, which is a discussion.
Well, we'll get to later.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I don't know. It's interesting. Like I said, probably a little bit reputation based. Thinking about like quantity of penalty minutes.
So what's the next trophy on the list?
Next up, we have the Jack Adams Award, presented to the coach adjudged to have contributed the most to his team's success, selected in a poll of NHLBA members. So, what are your thoughts on this trophy?
Well, just quickly, just kind of as an aside, I do find it strange that there's so many different people that vote, or groups of people that vote on the awards. Mm-hmm. So this is you said the Broadcasters Association that votes on this. The GMs vote on the Vezina.
Really?
I'm pretty sure. The writers vote on the Conn Smythe. The writers vote on the Hart Trophy. It just seems kind of all over the place. And so, like, okay, so if the writers were voting on the Jack Adams, would there be different winners? Well, if the GMs are voting on the Jack Adams, would there be different winners?
And on that note, so the NHLBA, the Broadcast Association, votes on the Jack Adams. And then when I scroll up to the Hart Trophy, the Professional Hockey Writers Association, it's a different group. The Broadcasting Association, I didn't even make that connection. That's like, that's interesting. I don't know where that started. Like, I'm assuming it has something to do with the inception of the trophy in the first place.
Right. There's some that make sense, and maybe these do make sense, and I'm just not cluing in. Like, but the Lindsay makes sense that it's voted on by the players, because it's like that's why it's named after Ted Lindsay. He started the PA. Well, he was one of the main.
Well, it used to be the
players behind the PA.
It used to be the Ted Lindsay Trophy used to be the
Pearson.
The Pearson?
Lester B. Pearson.
Lester B. Pearson Trophy, yeah. So it didn't start. It wasn't named after.
And they
Lindsay,
changed the name of it.
But it's always had the same meaning. It's basically the best player according to the other players,
right.
Which is maybe some people might consider that the proper best player in the league.
Well, and that's another thing we'll get to.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it is interesting. And again, we wouldn't mention all this, like who votes on each trophy, if there weren't sometimes picks that people kind of disagreed with. That's what makes this discussion so relevant. Yeah. Sometimes everybody's fairly satisfied with who wins the trophies, but other times they're not so much, and they point to the fact, who decided? Why did they decide? But regardless, so we're at the Jack Adams. So, when you think of the Jack Adams, I obviously described it already. What comes to mind for you?
What comes to mind is either a team that was dominant that season, that the coach wins it, or a team that I guess you could say overperformed, or people weren't expecting that much of. Maybe they had a poor year the year before, and then they had a great season. So that coach wins it. And it's subjective, as a lot of these trophies are, of course. But it's like, how do you necessarily determine who the best coach is? Right? Like, last year it was Bruce Cassidy. Okay, the Bruins had a great year. But could it not have been Trotz? Could it not have been, somebody else?
I mean, and again, I can't really offer my opinion on who it should go to. I think this is a trophy that is
because it's behind the scenes in a lot of places. That's why it's hard for us to determine, or for anyone who's not in the dressing room.
We'd have to look at the history of the winners, but I would think this is a trophy that was less controversial, so to speak, when there were fewer teams in the league, and you really could just kind of narrow it down to like which of the better of the 6 to 12 teams, give it to that coach or something like that, right? But now there's 31, soon to be 32 NHL teams. And like, yeah, I feel about the same. It tends, in my recollection, it tends to go to the coach of like the upstart team, the team that overperforms.
Well, like, okay.
Trotz would have been a great choice last year, in my opinion.
Trotz won in 19 with the Isles.
Right. For the same reason that, that they did so well in 20, really. It's the same kind of thing.
And 18 was Gallant, right, with Vegas in their first year.
Hard to disagree.
No one expected, yeah.
Hard to disagree with that choice, yeah.
Torts won it in 17 with the Jackets.
Yeah, brought them back to the playoffs.
So there's a lot, like, okay, Waugh, that's another great one in 14, right? Because I think the year before,
they were really good that year. They won.
Oh, right.
They won over 50 games. They had over 110 points. They won the division, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. Either that or they finished just shy of the division. They ended up losing to the Wild in 7 and then entered a brief period of turmoil afterwards. But the Gallant choice though, like if they had picked anybody else.
Oh, it had that's pretty obvious pick, I think, that year.
And again, it's not that we know that he was the best coach, but based on all of the metrics that the trophy is typically awarded on, it would have to go to Gallant that year.
Totally.
It's nuts. Really tough to predict that type of trophy too. Like you're saying, you tend to look at teams that had to scrape their way in, and it's assumed that the coach kept the group together and they get the trophy. And then every once in a while it'll go to someone like Bruce Cassidy, who coached a really good hockey team, which is kind of what you'd think is like what deserves the best coach. Is just like, well, who was the best team? Like the best team has to have a good coach. Like they don't just usually they don't do it all on their own. So anyway, do you have any more to add on the Jack?
No,
Adams
not
trophy?
Really.
Yeah, there's not much else to say. Next up, we have the Calder Memorial Trophy, an annual award given to the player selected as the most proficient in his first year of competition in the NHL, selected in a PWHA poll. So that's the professional writers of...
who never get anything wrong.
Professional... Did they get the acronym backwards? PWHA? Isn't it PHWA?
Yeah,
Professional Hockey Writers Association? NHL.com? Unless it's a different organization.
The first thing... No, it's... The Professional Hockey Writers Association votes on it.
Okay, so the PHWA, not the PWHA, vote on the Calder Memorial Trophy. Rookie of the Year, if it wasn't made clear enough by that description. Again, a trophy that is... I mean, it really... Sometimes it's an easy trophy to award. Right. Other times it's a little tougher. And sometimes it's very controversial.
This trophy might be... the one that I enjoy the most looking back on previous winners, because winning the Calder is a great way to start off your career, obviously, but it's no guarantee of success, right? Nope. It doesn't mean you're going to be a superstar for the rest of your career. And I do find it kind of interesting to look back on some previous winners.
Well, it's a real who's who of like, oh, I remember that guy sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
It's like Sergei Samsonov, I think, won it once.
He won it in 98, I think. You have Barrett Jackman won it.
Oh my god.
Leafs legend Andrew Raycroft won it. So yeah, there's definitely. But then Barrett Jackman, Andrew Raycroft,
Michael Ryder.
But then Ovechkin, Malkin, Kane, 3 years in a row.
Yeah, and I mean,
Patrick Kane, not Evander.
Yeah.
Although if Evander won it, he could have pawned off the trophy. That would have been nice, but
he could really use that right now, probably. Obviously every once in a while there's like a phenom that just comes and takes it as long as they don't get their collarbone broken.
And their competition is a 29-year-old pro from Russia. Yeah.
Sorry. What Taylor's saying right now is that Artemi Panarin is currently 34 years old.
No, I do find a little ridiculous though that. So we're going back a long time now. Gretzky was ineligible to win the Calder Trophy.
Right.
Because he was playing in the WHA. So he had professional experience, therefore he cannot win the Calder. and he was 17 when he played in the WHA, 18 when he played in the NHL. But then you can have guys that play 7 years in the KHL, and that's totally cool. Like, that makes no sense. Panarin was 24 when he won the Calder, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was around that age for sure. Yeah.
So
not as old as some people had assumed he was, but like he was older than your average like Calder winner.
I think that there should be some sort of a cap. I mean, there is
well,
a
there
cap.
is.
It's like 28 or something, right? It should be, in my opinion, it should be like 21 or 22.
Well, do you think
maybe goalies would be different, but
yeah. Well, do you think today's NHL would have done that to Gretzky though? Because you've probably done more research on it. You know a lot more about the WHA than I do.
A lot of the owners in the NHL didn't like the WHA. It was a rival league, right?
Yeah.
So this was kind of a way of
this is what you get.
Type of thing, like, and almost punishing Gretzky for signing with the WHA.
I mean, that's exactly what I've always assumed, is that it was basically just the NHL going like, you didn't pick us first, so we're not giving it to you,
right? And he lost to like friggin' who was his name?
I don't even know. I would not
Ray
know.
Bourque, I think, or something.
Oh, some bum.
I don't know what. He didn't do anything else. And Gretzky never won any awards.
Some career point per game defenseman.
I mean, if you're gonna lose the Calder, or
at least it was to Ray Bourque.
To Ray Bourque, yeah.
Well, didn't Gretzky have like 137 points?
Well, he won the Hart Trophy that year, but he didn't win the Art Ross because Dion and him had the same amount of points, but Dion had like 2 more goals.
Oh, okay.
So then, as kind of a way of making it up, they gave Gretzky the Hart Trophy. Gretzky, it worked out fine for him. He got his trophies. It's all good. Yeah. But what I'm getting at, going back to
it's worth
the McDavid thing, is I'm not saying McDavid should have won it that year because he missed a significant amount of time, but it does seem silly to me that guys who are 24, like, how are we going to be okay with a 26? Like, what is the limit? Is it 28? It just seems...
We can figure it out in a moment here.
But anyway.
Well, didn't Sergei Makarov win it? He was like 30 when he won it, too.
Yeah, and they lowered the age that you had to be. He's born in 58 and he won it in 90. So he's 32.
Wow, yeah. Well, they just had a different... Again, it was just a different... Very different league, right? Like today, that would have massive outcry. At the time, maybe people were kind of just not as concerned about it. I don't know.
Didn't really care.
Well, and I don't know, like... Again, we're talking about, as we've kind of already emphasized, a very different NHL. The youth in the NHL are so much more important now. It's a young man's game, the NHL. Back then, rookies, I don't know how often you got a rookie coming into the league putting up more than like 60, 70 points. And again, that doesn't happen today even, every season. But it does. It feels like, the rookies are coming in with a little more... They're able to go toe-to-toe with some of these dudes right off the bat more these days. Back then, they had less clout. If you weren't a phenom, maybe you weren't granted the ice time that you probably deserved. I don't know, right? We don't really know these things for sure. But it's just a very different NHL. I don't know how people felt about, someone like Makarov winning it in their 30s. I know that if we want like a truly controversial pick, because like obviously, McDavid, we can talk about Panarin's age, but McDavid couldn't really win it that year just because he missed so much time, even though he had 48 points in 45 games, if I remember correctly.
He was 3rd in points per game in the league.
If he had managed to get like 65 points in 60 games, then the discussion becomes a little more like, oh, he probably could have had it over Panarin, but he missed, like you said, almost half the season, so it makes it tough for them to pick him. But let's take a look at like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins losing to Gabe Landeskog in 2012, where they had pretty much the same number of points.
I think they both had 52 points.
McDavid. Nugent-Hopkins missed close to 20 games.
I think Nuge played 62 games, 52 points, and
Landeskog played the whole season.
Played 82.
And they used that against Nugent-Hopkins in voting. Like, that's almost as if they didn't feel like he played a full season, played a proper season or something. It's almost like they looked at that and thought he's not really eligible to win or something. I mean, obviously he got votes, but like, I don't know what's going on there. That's
there's been some weird things with the Calder, like in 2013. Who won it there? Huberdeau.
Right.
So that Huberdeau's a great player, obviously, and I'm not saying he didn't deserve it, but Yakupov, if we want to have a blast from the past here, he was first in scoring amongst rookies because he was tied for the scoring for rookies, and he had the most goals, so therefore he had the tiebreaker, and he wasn't a finalist.
He wasn't even a finalist.
No,
he had a hat trick in his last game too.
I think he was 4th or 5th in voting, and it just seems like kind of weird. Like, why is that?
This is involving the Oilers quite a bit. The Calder Trophy clearly
there's
has issues with the Oilers.
There's a Calder curse. Gretzky should have won it, and she'll screwed him. Jason Arnott could have won it, didn't. Hall got injured. Nuge got injured, even though, as we already discussed, he
probably should have won that trophy.
Yakupov wasn't even a finalist, if I'm not mistaken.
Got snubbed straight
McDavid
up.
got injured. Like, there's a weird thing going on with the Calder and the Oilers. Yeah. But anyway.
And it kind of opens and closes with that. It doesn't mean anything more than that, but it's there, and it's like consistently happened. But yes, regardless, the next trophy we're going to discuss
is the Bud Light Plus Minus Award. Now, this award is one of the most prestigious. That was actually a thing, though. Back in like 2003.
The only defensive trophy that I can think of. Okay, so let's next up, let's talk about the Frank J. Selke Trophy.
Okay.
So, we talked about we were going from worst to best, but we're getting into the meat of the trophies pretty quickly here. So, for those of you who were listening at the beginning and were wondering what the hell we were talking about, there really aren't any bad trophies. Like
no, just less prestigious. Or,
But we're right in the meat here now. Frank J. Selke Trophy. The Frank J. Selke Trophy is an annual award given to the forward who best excels in the defensive aspects of the game. This one is juicy. This is I don't want to say it's super controversial. I mean, it's not very diverse. It's not a diverse trophy. Like the league, and again, I say the league, I'm not really certain who votes on this trophy. It doesn't actually say on the website there.
It's the Professional Hockey Writers.
It's the writers again? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the winner is, usually very deserving. I think it's pretty reputation based to some extent. If you look at the winners, it's a lot of Datsyuks, Bergerons, Taves is in there somewhere. I think Kopitar's in there. Kessler won it once. It's not a huge pool of players that get it, and it tends to be centers. That I know for sure. The Frank J. Selke Trophy.
It hasn't been a winger since 2003.
Who won it in 2003?
Lettinen.
Yuri Lettinen. Yeah. Oh, he was
he won several. He won 3.
Yeah, he was definitely in his time. He was considered one of the best defensive forwards in the game. It's gone to guys like Datsuk and Bergeron and Taves, all three of whom are very likely going to the Hall of Fame.
Hands down, I would say.
Yeah. Datsuk would be now if he wasn't still playing professionally in Russia, which I had forgotten about until recently, that he is still playing professional hockey.
For me, the award is very reputation based, right? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Well, I mean, is there a better defensive forward in hockey than, say, Patrice Bergeron?
Right.
Or Jonathan Taves or Ryan O'Reilly? Like, are these guys? Is there anybody that should be beating these guys?
Yeah,
maybe not.
And I do find it interesting, like you said, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be in the Hall of Fame. Like, if you look at, and we'll get to the Hart Trophy later, but if you look at the Hart Trophy winners, most of them eventually make the Hall of Fame. Not all of them, but a majority of them do. Whereas if you look, I mean, you got Brendan Moore in here, who's kind of like on the cusp, but I don't think he'll be a Hall of Famer.
He was a heck of a player, but he's
Hall of very good, let's say.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll have a whole episode dedicated to the Hall of Fame. Like, we can go totally in depth, because I was about to start getting into that, but I was about to mention a little guy named Kevin Lowe before.
And moving on. So Chris Draper.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so Yuri Lettinen, like we mentioned, he won 3 Selkies, but I don't think anyone seriously considers him a Hall of Fame player, right?
No.
But he won 3, so 3 times in his career, he was considered the best defensive forward in the NHL. And that's not good enough to make the Hall of Fame.
No,
so I think that while it's an important award, it doesn't seem to... It doesn't add so much to a guy's legacy. It seems like, at least.
Yeah. Guy Carbonneau's in the Hall of Fame now. He won the Selke, I think, 3 or 4 times.
Guy Carbonneau won it 3 times.
That might be a little bit of NHL Boys Club going on there, but again, I'm not going to get into it because we can do a whole episode on this.
Restrain yourself, Hunter.
Yes.
Mike Pekka won it.
Yeah, he was a good
Dirk Graham. So if you look at the 80s, like it looks like half of the guys aren't Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
So, which is fine. Like I'm not, but it does kind of.
Well, it tells you about who gets in the Hall of Fame, right?
Is a little interested in, and maybe there's a bias against defensive-minded forwards,
or just a bias toward offense,
right?
And again, it's, in all honesty, it's kind of how I feel. Generally speaking, I think that to be considered among the best of the best, you have to have been a scorer, like whether through assists or through goals. In my opinion, I think. Generally speaking, again, this isn't universal, like in every aspect, but the best players in NHL history, in my opinion, generated points. So that's how I feel about that.
What I find kind of interesting too is because it is based on the eye test in most cases, right? Obviously, there's analytics, and advanced stats that you can look at, but
nowadays,
the Professional Hockey Writers Association, I don't know how much they're looking into that, right?
We're not even sure how many West Coast games they're watching in any given night.
So, what I'm getting at though is it's supposed to go to the forward that demonstrates the most skill in the defensive component of the game, as it says in the. Okay, so why then do we so often hear when they're talking about who's going to win the Selke? Oh, well, he had 35 goals, or he had like when Kessler. And I'm not saying Kessler shouldn't have won it, but just when Kessler won, it's like, oh, he had 44 goals that year. Okay, but
it's 41 actually.
41. Oh well, okay. I don't want to give him too much credit. So okay, he had 41 goals. Like that's obviously a great season, but why does that matter in the context of the best defensive player? Apart from he had the puck a lot, which I guess is good, obviously defensively.
I think he was still playing on the penalty kill to some extent. He was also a center. He won a good portion of his face-offs. And again, these are just the things that were working in his favor.
Those all make sense.
And he was a finalist 2 years in a row before that.
But why does him scoring 40 goals, why does that matter for a defensive award? To me, that doesn't really make sense.
I guess it's because, and again...
And you hear that all the time when it comes to the Selke. Oh, well, he scored this many points. Well, all right. So what?
Does that play into like the decision making, right?
Yeah.
And I guess part of it too, like Kessler was a finalist 2 years before going into that, so he had established through reputation and through recognition, but he has a reputation. Okay, this is a defensive forward. Defensive forward scores 40 goals. Clearly, he's the best two-way hockey player in the game. Right? So I guess that's how that works, right?
But that's the thing, right? Is this award for defensive forwards, or for two-way forwards? And it straight up says defensive.
Yeah, you're right.
The game
best excels in defensive aspects.
That's the only thing that I don't really understand about the award. But.
Well, I think to kind of sum it up, I think you have to be getting a decent amount of ice time. Like you can't just be some fourth line shutdown guy.
Of course. Generally,
you have to be. You don't have to be a center, but they clearly prefer centers. Centers are. I mean, in terms of defense, centers are very important because, like that face-off right off the bat, the center also covers a wider range of positions on the ice. Like the wingers are designed defensively, at least, to stay on a side of the ice. The hockey's a dynamic sport, so they don't stay put. It's not like soccer where you kind of have players kind of like pinpointed in certain spots. They obviously still move around in soccer as well, but in hockey it's dynamic. Guys switch around. But what you're generally told is the center covers the range of the ice. The wingers stick to the point. So you can see why center kind of gets prioritized defensively.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think we're ready to move on now. Next trophy.
I'm not ready to. Actually, okay, no, go ahead.
Next up, we can discuss the. I was going to say the Norris. I kind of want to save that one because that one is super juicy.
It's yeah.
Let's do the Vezina Trophy next.
Sure.
Okay, next up we have the Vezina Trophy. The Vezina Trophy is an annual award given to the goalkeeper adjudged to be the best at this position as voted by the general managers of all NHL clubs. Again, we mentioned this earlier, how this is not voted by the journalists, it's voted by the GMs. Fine, whatever. That's honestly kind of how I feel all the trophies should be voted to some extent, with the exception of the Lindsay Award. But anyway, the Vezina Trophy. So...
Now, one of the most important things about the Vezina, before we get into it too much, is that definition that you just gave has only been relevant since 1982.
Right, because it used to be.
Beforehand, it was the goaltender or goaltenders of the team that allowed the fewest goals, which is now the William Jennings Trophy.
Yeah, Jennings Trophy goes to the goaltending tandem as long as the backup plays a certain number of games. Goes to the goaltending
25,
tandem.
I think.
Yeah, it goes to the goaltending tandem that has the lowest goals against average over the course of a whole season. Yeah, there was
so back in the day, like back in the 50s and 60s, there were seasons where two guys won the Vezina because it was like the William Jennings Trophy is nowadays.
There was a shift sometime in I want to say between the 70s and the 90s, there was a shift in assessing goaltenders where they stopped looking at goals against average and they started looking at save percentage.
Right.
Hockey statisticians have been doing their best to compile save percentage stats, I've noticed. Because when I was looking at these numbers, I want to say 10, 15 years ago, save percentage basically ended in the mid 80s, it began in the mid 80s. And if you look back any further, you'd only get goals against averages for goaltenders. Now I believe when you look at Hockey Reference, they've done what they can to compile shots for old time goalies to try and give you as accurate an idea of save percentage as they possibly could. Because the truth is, and I remember reading this years and years ago when I was first getting into hockey properly, goalie shots against were not recorded accurately back in the day. It was written on somebody would be keeping track of it to some extent, I guess, and they'd write it on a piece of paper, but it wasn't done clinically like it is now, where you have people likely evaluating whether or not a puck actually is a shot on goal, like right to the tee, because it matters. It matters for the player shooting the puck, the goalie facing the puck, for the guy who might block it, and the Corsi and the Fenwick and all that stuff. They need to know whether a puck was going to be on net or even just in the vicinity of it. And eventually, like I said, they've been tracking those numbers retrospectively. The save percentage became actually more important, I want to say in the 90s, because like when I watched like old clips, when they showcase goalies, they're still just talking about the goals against average,
right.
Which is, it's funny that they just kind of changed.
And the William Jennings is like a team award. That's why it can be.
Yeah.
It's given to sometimes two goalies, right?
And the thing is,
and that's what the Vezina was back.
Yeah.
40 years ago.
And goals against average is, if you have a really low goals against average, it probably means you're a good goalie, like to some extent. The thing is, if you have a high goals against average, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad goalie. Mm-hmm. So it's just not an accurate. You can't just look at like the number of goals given up per game and decide, oh well, he gave up 2.6 per game, the other guy gave up 2.2. Guess obviously the one with the lower one's better. That's just not how that works. And for some reason, the media, the NHL, whoever didn't really that didn't occur to them until relatively recently in hockey's history.
Math only came into existence in like 1972, I think.
Yeah, I don't think they didn't even know years existed until the 80s. So, in the time frame that they've been awarding the Vezina for the player judged the best goaltender, Dominic Hasek, of course, has won 6 times, so he's the gold standard. I've got Broder there 4 times. How many did Wall win? Looks like 3. So there was, for a while, like in the 90s, there were guys that were winning it, it seemed like multiple times. Mm-hmm. But now over the last decade or so, you have Thomas won it twice, mm-hmm. won his second in 2011. And then Bobrovsky won it twice. Mm-hmm. But then apart from that, you've got a lot of guys winning it the first time. Yep. And
which I don't know if that speaks to a lack of, 1 or 2 mega star goalies like there were back in the 90s, or if that's just the talent pool is.
I think the talent pool is very wide. Like I think the position, the nature of the position, the deployment of goaltenders has changed so much, even just in the past 10 years. You no longer designate a guy to play 70 games. Like that's just like, if that happens, it's because you didn't have a good backup or somebody got hurt and you had to lean on somebody. And if that happens, you hear talk all off season about taking the load off that goaltender. Like the last guy that comes to mind for me is Cam Talbot in 2017 with the Oilers. Played 70 some games, had a great year, but that just is not like. Teams, coaches, they want their goalie playing somewhere between 50 and no more than like 65 games in a season now. And you're expected to have a good backup. If you want to be a good team, you're expected to have a good backup. And I would say that we definitely don't have that one goalie right now. We haven't had a string of dominance that is good enough to win the trophy every year since, in my opinion, since Dominic Hasek.
Even Bobrovsky, who won it in the lockout shortened year in 13, and then 17, he wins the Vezina twice, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But then he's had a bunch of weird years in between, and now he's struggling in Florida.
If you take out those 2 Vezina years, he's still a really good goalie, but he would not have the reputation. He would not, obviously he wouldn't have that 8-year contract in Florida. But if you take out those 2 seasons, it's a solid goaltender. Yeah, right. Sorry, 7-year contract. He's a solid goalie without those 2 seasons, but he's not the. I don't know. He's an interesting discussion for the Hall of Fame.
Okay, so if he has a great year this year or next year, let's say, and he wins another Vezina, how can you keep him out of the Hall of Fame? Right, like he's won 3 Vezinas.
And it's a very interesting question because he was garbage last year. Like he was straight up garbage. We talked about this in the other video. So if he finds a way to win another Vezina, but intersperses it with these garbage seasons, like what are we supposed to do with that? Like how are we supposed to honor that player when he retires?
And that kind of maybe speaks to a bigger question in this entire video, is how important are these awards?
Yeah.
Right? And does winning 3 Vezinas, is that automatic you're in the Hall of Fame?
Well,
there more to it, right?
This is all playing into like a really big Hall of Fame video, basically, or podcast.
Well, and there's a lot of crossover though, right?
Yes,
because we're talking about guys' legacies.
Yeah.
How many? So because you follow goalies a little more closely than I do. It's not like I dislike goalies. I'm not a big fan. They get in the way of scoring goals. So that's their whole purpose in the game. I don't really appreciate it.
Goalies are ruining hockey.
Goalies, have they gone too far? So how many, in your opinion, being that you're more, you follow the goalies a little more closely, how many games minimum do you think in an 82 game season a goalie has to play to win the Vezina?
It's
like
good. It's
55. Is that too few?
That's a good question, and it matters. It's season contextual, and I'm not just talking about the length of seasons because obviously that's an issue this year and last year.
I'm just going like 82 game season.
Like Vasilevsky won it in the 2018-19 season. He played, I think, 49 games.
What?
And this is because no goalie managed to be both healthy and really good that year, basically. And again, that's a very general statement, but he was competing against Ben Bishop, who similarly only played 40-some games with very similar stats. Again, I may be misremembering the numbers to a T, but...
he played 53 games.
Bishop?
No,
Vasilevsky, yeah. Which was... Yeah, and he was hurt that year. Like, he would have played more like 60. But... That year, I remember the choices for best goaltender were limited to guys who hadn't played as much as they likely would have.
Leonard got nominated that year?
Yes, he did. He was a finalist.
Yeah.
He was a Vezina finalist. He only played 40 games or 41 games.
That's so weird.
It was weird, and again, it was because
that's an anomaly.
Yeah, it was an anomaly because no goalie played both 60 games and deserved to win the Vezina trophy.
Okay, so let's say it's a normal year where there's because that, like you said, that's kind of an outlier. In a normal season, do you think 55 is the minimum?
Honestly, I'm pretty open to it being, maybe even just 50. And I say that because it depends on, we have all these stats now that can tell you what a goalie is worth, like what they brought to the table for their team. There's a stat that I've found really interesting in the last couple of years. It's called goals saved above average, where basically, and I couldn't tell you how they figure out the math for it, but they use number of shots faced, the danger level of the shots faced. Like literally they're looking at like all the details of the experience this goalie had in their season, and they come up with a number of goals prevented above an average goaltender. So 0 is supposed to be like, that is an average goal. Some goalies are bad enough that they're negative. It's one of those types of stats. Like you can have a negative goal saved above average stat. And this has been a really interesting stat to look at.
Which is named after Braden Holtby, if I'm not mistaken.
God damn it. This is a really interesting number to look at when you look at old Vezina winners, when, this number technically didn't exist. Like, sure. At least they didn't know it existed.
You're using it retroactively.
Yes. So nowadays, a really good goalie over the course of a whole season, almost regardless of how many games they play, I don't mean that like literally, but like really good goalies, it's somewhere between 25 and like 35 goals saved above average is like, wow, that's really good.
Sure.
And I mean, honestly, like 15 to 20 is really good too.
That's like, yeah. If over the course, if a guy plays 55 games, that's 8.7 goals
Yeah,
a game.
And I'm going to, because it's relevant
Ish.
for this trophy,
I got a C in grade 10 math, so I'm not entirely sure.
I am going to... I remember when I was looking up Roberto Luongo's stats, which I've done many, many times over the last
actually.
12 years of my life. If I look at his goals saved above average, so in 2004, Luongo saved 48.42 goals above average, which led the league, and finished third in Vezina voting.
That's crazy. He also faced 7,000 shots.
He did, yeah. He actually died, and they brought him back to life. But so when I look at the Vezina Trophy winner that year, it was Martin Brodeur, who I believe had a terrific season of his own that season. Pardon me. It was Martin Brodeur who won it in 2004, the 2003-2004 season. He had a great year. He stopped, 10.3 goals saved above average. Luongo had more than 4 times the goals saved above average. Wow. But he played on Florida, and they didn't make the playoffs.
Well, and Brodeur is Martin Brodeur. He just won a cup at that point. He had 3 cups to his name. Yeah. That was probably his, third Vezina? Or something?
Let's take a look here.
So the point that I'm getting at is
it was his second,
okay.
He won 2 more after.
But he had quite the reputation.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. And he had been on Team Canada 2 years before. The thing with Brodeur is you'll hear a lot of people say, "Oh, such an overrated goalie because of the team he played on." Again, when I look through Brodeur's stats, there are years where he is upwards of 20 and 30 goals saved above average. Brodeur was a great goaltender who 100% deserves to be an all-time goalie, Hall of Fame, one of the best that ever played. I don't care that he played on the really good New Jersey Devils for most of his career. The guy was a good part of that team and was a key part of their success.
He's a legendary St. Louis Blue.
Oh God!
No, I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and he Brodeur himself led the league in goals saved above average twice.
Right.
Which is, and when I look through here, he had good numbers in that category. But my point being that I think Nabokov was a finalist in a year where he absolutely 100% shouldn't have been.
Right.
They like the wins too, right? When they look at the Vezina Trophy, that's not as important today. Kind of like with the Cy Young Trophy in baseball, when they look at pitchers, they're trying. I can feel it when I look at the way they vote for players. They're trying not to look at the wins, because we talk about how goalie wins aren't that meaningful. Pitching wins are fucking meaningless. It is it's a sexy little stat that goes on top of a pitcher's good season. It completely relies on players who you don't play with on the field generating offense,
of course, which is fine for an award like the Jennings.
The Jennings, yeah, team defense or something, right? And but it's very different. It's different in hockey because the goalie's on the ice the whole time. The pitcher is only the pitcher can only prevent runs. If they're not getting wins when they're playing really, really well, it's because the team can't score. So anyway, it's complete
enough of the baseball
talk. Baseball, Hunter. But yeah, the Vezina Trophy, we've been talking about this for quite a while because it is. I felt pretty content with how they've awarded it, in recent years. It's only when you look back that you see that they really prioritized. They really like to see the wins, and they still like goals against average back in the day. Shutouts played a role as well. Generally speaking, though, I'm pretty happy with how it's been given out, and I certainly feel, despite me just talking about how when you look back in time you see problems, Dominik Hasek deserves all those friggin' Vezina trophies.
It was incredible. He did.
I mean, we're talking about a guy who I think he's the best goaltender in NHL history. I'm just gonna put that out there.
I agree too.
We could probably talk about him for an entire episode. Do you have any more to add on the Vezina Trophy?
No, not too much. I think that if no.
We didn't talk about the Ted Lindsay, but I don't have much to say about the Ted Lindsay.
Oh, I do.
Okay, well then let's. Okay,
let's go.
Next up, we're going to talk about the Ted Lindsay Award, formerly the Lester B. Pearson Award. The Ted Lindsay Award is presented annually to the most outstanding player in the NHL, as voted by the fellow members of the National Hockey League Players Association. So the union buddies deciding who their best player in the NHL is, which is very meaningful, very important.
Okay, hot take here.
Okay.
This should be the most prestigious individual award in the NHL.
Go on.
So, the guys voting on this award play against the other guys that are up for the award. They actually know what's going on the ice, right? And they play against everybody. right? Because not this year, of course, because of the division, the way divisions are.
This will be a different kind of Ted Lindsay Award maybe than like other years.
Oh, sure,
in a sense. It'll be based on what guys watch.
But most years, guys are playing the candidates for the Lindsay twice a year at least, right? Mm-hmm. If they're in opposite conferences. So they have a really good sense, and they know each other, obviously. They know the opinions of other players. And so I think that it's way more valuable to win an award based on who the players are voting. And the other thing too is this is the most outstanding player. This is for the best player, right? Yeah. Whereas the Hart, which we'll get to later, is the most valuable player to his team. And that causes so many issues with regard to the criteria and what that means. This is just who's the best.
Yeah, who's
the best player that given season.
Yeah.
And so I think it's unfortunate that the Lindsay doesn't get as much interest around it compared to the Hart, because this is just straight up who was the best player that season.
And there's no doubt the Hart is the trophy. The Hart Trophy is the trophy that people pine after, that is hyped up, and maybe that has something to do with the media voting for it as well, right? It's the one that gets talked about the most.
It's the one that they always award last, though, at the award show, right?
It's clearly
the best picture of NHL awards.
Yes, for individual players, it's the one, and it is unfortunate that the Lindsay doesn't, like, it's almost like, and the players thought he was pretty good too. You know what I mean? It's just like,
it's strange. And do you know how many? It was kind of interesting. Do you know how many Lindsays at the time, Pearsons, Gretzky won?
How many?
Just if you were to guess.
Oh God. Okay, I'm gonna make the guess that a rational person would. Right. I'm gonna say exactly. Like 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
5.
Wow.
Yeah, and he won 10 Hearts. So now, what is that? Does that mean that Gretzky wasn't that outstanding, or is there maybe more to it than just, oh, this guy had the most points, or this guy? I don't know. It's interesting.
Gretzky should have won. Like, we can talk about how many Hart trophies he should have won. He won plenty of friggin' Hart trophies, and there's controversy to him winning at least one of his Hart trophies. I know there's a year where Lemieux probably should have won it.
Yeah.
We can
88, I believe.
Yeah. And it was kind of this. They just decided, the writers. There was this whole narrative around, and again, narrative plays a big role in some of these trophies.
Totally.
But we'll try to focus on the Lindsay. Gretzky probably should have won. I mean, if we're going to talk about, let's think about Gretzky's career. Let's think about how long he was Gretzky for. Gretzky probably should have won, 13, 14 Ted Lindsay trophies. Maybe no more than that, because once you get to the mid-90s, he does become less, I'm using big quotes with my fingers now, less of an exceptional player. A guy that maybe gets somewhere between 100 and 140 points, but not like 160 to 215 points. There were more guys that were his equal production-wise from the mid-90s onward, but like for the first 3 quarters of Gretzky's career, who else do you think would be the best player in hockey, right? So that is odd. That's interesting. I'd be curious to see the spread of winners.
Marcel Dion won it, like we mentioned.
Yeah.
In 1980.
The Pearson Lindsay.
Yeah. Dion won that. Then Mike Lute won it in 81, which I'd love to hear. Goaltender Mike Lute. He's not a Hall of Famer. I'd be interested to
literally never heard of this man. He must have had a good year. Who was he playing for?
St. Louis Blues. He had the league's best goals against average in 1990.
Crossing over into Vezina territory.
So I don't know what that's all about.
That's really interesting.
But then Gretzky won it 4 years in a row. Lemieux won it in 86. Gretz won it in 87. Then Yzerman, Messier, Brett Hull. So...
But yeah, I mean, like you're saying, this is best player assessed by the other players. I know that for my own, as the Canucks guy here, the year that Forsberg won the Hart Trophy in 2003, Naslund won the Pearson / Lindsay Trophy that year. And
the other thing too with this award that I think makes it better than the Hart Trophy is that it doesn't matter how good your team is.
Yeah.
Right? With the Hart Trophy, your team has to make the playoffs.
Oh my God.
So pretty soon, what that means is, once there's Seattle next year, what that means is half of the league's players will effectively be ineligible to win the Hart Trophy.
Yeah, they're just not.
Because their team missed the playoffs, so they can't win.
Be the most valuable.
Whereas this is just like, who's the best player?
Yeah.
So most of the time, that best player is going to play on a playoff team.
Yeah.
But in the seasons they don't, like in 2018, where the Oilers missed the playoffs, McDavid can still win it, but he couldn't win the Hart.
maybe do you want to just transition right into the Hart Trophy now? Because like
Let's
we're
do it.
already like we've been like the Pearson, half the discussion with the Pearson connects it to the Hart.
Totally.
So let's just transition right to the Hart Trophy. Some people might be surprised that we're doing this because we haven't done the Norris Trophy yet, but the Norris Trophy is arguably as controversial as the Hart, if not maybe even more so in some sense. So let's move right along here. The Hart Memorial Trophy. It is an annual award given to the player judged to be the most valuable to his team. The winner is selected in a poll of the Professional Hockey Writers Association in all NHL cities at the end of the regular season. So, this trophy is the great chameleon of criteria-based trophies, where it really kind of depends on the season. And there are journalists that have said this. I believe Elliot Friedman. I think you told me, Taylor.
Yeah,
actually,
I've heard him
once
say
said,
that people vote for it different ways in different years.
Yeah.
There's some years that they'll vote for whoever the best player was, and then other years they'll take the meaning literally and who was the most valuable player to his team.
And I don't even. The thing is, for me, with this trophy, that doesn't bother me so much, but it has to be appropriate. So, for example, the year that Carey Price won the Hart Trophy in, I believe that was 2015.
Yeah.
That was a year where no player eclipsed 90 points.
Right. That was the Jamie Benn.
Jamie Benn snatched the Art Ross in the last game of the season.
Yeah.
So nobody eclipsed 90 points. There were a number of players in the 80s. The league was it was right before they started calling some more penalties and kind of re-2006ing the NHL to an extent. Scoring was on a bit of a decline. And for whatever reason, nobody was producing at a 100-point pace, really. And Carey Price was dominant pretty much all year. I do remember his stats, they tailed off just a little bit at the end because his numbers were so just spectacular for most of the season. And again, that's a total afterthought I'm making right there. He had a spectacular year and 100% deserved to win the Hart Trophy in 2015. But let's fast forward to 2018 when Taylor Hall, who I believe was somewhere between 7th and 9th in league scoring, won the Hart Trophy. And you'll find a lot of people think that was a good choice, partly because it's all the media wanted to talk about from, I want to say, January onward. Taylor Hall had a really nice point streak going that year for the New Jersey Devils, who were kind of playing against their expectations to an extent. They made the playoffs that year, despite not being expected to. And it had a lot to do with Taylor Hall's play. And in terms of quality players on that team, he kind of stood alone statistically. I think the next best player on the team had 50-some points. They also had Nico Hischier on the team, who had a pretty solid rookie year. And they had some good decent goaltending from Keith Kincaid, and Corey Schneider did kind of what he could in his unfortunate, what I think was injury-riddled decline to his NHL career. But they gave it to Hall, even though I'm pretty sure 3 or 4 players eclipsed 100 points. I don't know.
Here's what drives me crazy about this award.
Yeah.
Okay. 17, McDavid wins it. 100 points. I think the next highest was 89. I think Crosby had 89. And Oilers make the playoffs. And so it's like no question, hands down, McDavid is the MVP, Hart Trophy winner. No one had any issue with that. The next season, McDavid has a better year statistically, okay? Wins the Art Ross again, 108 points. His team is worse, therefore they miss the playoffs. Therefore, he can't win the Hart Trophy. So he has a better year in 2018, but he can't win the individual award because the rest of his team wasn't as good. So how does it make any sense?
It makes no sense. He's literally better, therefore doing more for a team that is, he's actually proportionally more valuable.
Right. And it's like, well, he should have done more to help his team. It's like he won the Hart Trophy the year before, not doing as well.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. And then, because so Taylor Hall wins it that year, because then they decide, it's all about the team success. It's all about most valuable to the team, and he pulled the team. And so, you can't give it to a guy that has other star players on his team. Right, because
that drives me bananas.
Yeah, okay, and then in 2019, who wins the Hart Trophy?
Nikita Kucherov.
With
128 points.
128 points, but he's got Vasilevsky, won the Vezina. He's got Hedman, who was a Norris candidate. He's got Stamkos and Point, who I believe are both top 20 in scoring.
They both
had 90 points, 90 plus points.
Like, what's going on?
How does that make any sense?
It's
And I'm not. And by the way, what I'm saying is that the Hart Trophy should just be awarded to the best player. Of course, Nikita Kucherov deserved to win the Hart Trophy in 2019. He was far and away the best player in the league. But that's not what they voted the Hart Trophy on the previous year.
No.
When Taylor Hall won it, Hall wasn't the best player in the NHL that year. Right? It's so frustrating that year after year they just decide to change the criteria based on what narrative suits them that season.
And again, that's why I said that like Price was a good choice in 2015 because there wasn't an exceptional skater, basically. So you can't... What I'm saying is, if Hall had the season he had in 2015, I think that would have been... And again, he would have literally led the league with 93 points, so it kind of fits into our definition of the trophy anyway. But, it's... So when people say this, when people say, well, it's about who's most valuable to their team, and he had this teammate, so he can't win it. So does that mean that Connor McDavid, as long as he's on the same team as Leon Draisaitl, and vice versa, and again, Draisaitl is the reigning Hart Trophy winner, so that the league again recognized top scoring talent last year. The writers. So as long as those two play together, though, like, is McDavid never supposed to ever win another Hart Trophy? Like, is that how we treated the trophy for the past, 50 years?
People were saying last year.
Are you going to say that next year and the year after when he continually...
They were saying, well, Draisaitl shouldn't win because he has McDavid on his team. Kucherov played on the best regular season team in, 20 years. How does it make any sense at all? And then you go down the list. Okay, so... Gretzky shouldn't have won his 10 Hearts.
Yeah, it's not like he was playing on a dynastic Oilers franchise. Like he was playing
with Messier and Curry, who Messier won the Hart Trophy. Curry led the league in goals one year. Friggin' Paul Coffey, right? Oh, and then let's go through the other guys. So should Joe Sakic not have won it because he had Peter Forsberg on his team? It's like, no, there are teams that have other great players, right? Lemieux and Jagr, two of the greats of all time. But so that wasn't a problem, but now all of a sudden we want to follow the letter of the criteria. We have to do everything according to... No, that's ridiculous. Just give it to the best player. Well, why are you making it's like a pretzel or something that you have to bend over back? You're playing Twister. Where it's like, well, what about this and that and that? No, the best player.
Well, and that's the funniest part about it too, is that when we make these questions, if I go on Reddit or whatever, or if I talk with some people, other people who like hockey and they feel maybe that Hall should have won it that year, they always look at you and they go but it's the most valuable to the... They always say as if it's always been awarded that way.
As if this is it's some set in stone thing that you have to award it to the most valuable to... If it's the most valuable to his team, it should probably be a goalie every single season. I was just thinking
that. Yeah, it would be a goalie more often than not. Yeah. It would, because how many times...
Very rarely a goalie.
It's actually it's the special thing.
Unless you're a goalie for the Habs or are Dominic Hasek, I don't think that you can win a Hart Trophy if you're a goaltender.
It's like how many times have we watched a team get carried through a season by a goalie, and it happens almost every year where a team is just they rely on the goalie and he does his best, and it's without him we wouldn't have won, and it's well, maybe he's the most valuable. It's just yeah, and then through all this is the most prestigious trophy, right? This shit show that we're talking about right now. So
yeah, that's the thing that annoys me the most, is when you question, well, why did this guy win? Or why did that guy... Well, it's most valuable to his team. It's so you can go back in history. So Phil Esposito won the Hart Trophy. Yeah. Bobby Orr won the Hart Trophy. How is that possible? How is it possible that two Hart caliber players on the same team?
Yeah.
Right? Because back then they didn't award it like that.
Yeah.
They didn't take it literally. They didn't they were just okay, this guy's the best player that season.
Yeah.
There it is. And now all of a sudden everyone has to be so smart. There has to be the smartest person in the room. And well, actually, it's awarded to the most valuable player to his team. So therefore, if you consider that,
actually,
it's that in NHL trophy form, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and you never really know. You always have to keep your ear out, around the midpoint of a season to see if they're starting to buzz about a certain player, because.
They do that with the Norris more than anything.
Oh, we'll get to that in a second. I think we should do that one next. Yeah. But yeah, with when you're hearing about the Norris and the Hart, see if you start seeing some articles about certain players or some buzz, when you're watching a highlight package halfway through the year. The year is not anywhere close to being done, but they're talking about this guy a lot, and they seem to want him to win a certain trophy pretty badly. I don't know what's going on there.
And I should point out that since Bobby Orr won the Hart in his last was 72. Interesting. Since 1972, there's been one defenseman.
And his name rhymes with Schmiss-Longer.
That's right. It does. What a coincidence.
Yeah.
And goaltenders are sprinkled throughout, like I mentioned, Price and Theodore, Hasek. I think that's pretty well it.
Yeah.
I feel, those TV shows where they're like investigating a murder scene and they have like a big board with strings all attached?
Yeah.
That's how I feel about the Hart Trophy sometimes when they're awarding it. It's like, why are you doing that? Why are you making it more complicated than it needs to be?
Yeah.
And having how many ever writers vote on the award. You've got a portion of them voting one way, a portion of them. Some guys won't vote for a guy that misses the play. If you can't win the Hart Trophy because your team missed the playoffs, then you should be ineligible.
Yeah.
Why is it that you can have a guy that misses the playoffs who otherwise would win the Hart Trophy, who finishes like 5th? If he can't win it, then just make him ineligible.
Yeah.
Because you can't vote for him. But, no, he can miss the playoffs, and we won't vote some guys won't vote for him because of that, but others will still vote for him. Like, do you not see how the voting is so skewed?
Yeah, it's
when you have these criteria are all over the map, and then there's some people that vote, like Elliot Friedman was saying, based on who the best player is.
Yeah.
So it's like it's an award that is just all over the place when it comes to the reasons voters vote for the players they do.
I would like to ask some of these writers, at what threshold would you be forced to pick a player whose team missed the playoffs? Like, how many points did that guy need to get?
So, like, if McDavid, or it doesn't have to be McDavid, if anyone scored, his team missed the playoffs, so he scored 150 points, and the next closest was 100 points. So, is that, like, will you vote for him then? And if so, why?
Yeah.
His team missed the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Right?
It's like, yeah. Well, this was different, Yeah.
Okay, so I think we should move on, because I've about had my fill of...
Nice.
The Hart. Unless you had something else to say.
No, we covered everything there. Like, I think you and I think people have probably at this point have noticed we're not disagreeing on a whole lot of stuff in this podcast episode. And Taylor and I are certainly of pretty much the exact same. Like, I should say I don't think the Hart Trophy. And again, our buddy Nick will like to hear this because I've had this discussion with Nick before. I don't think that it should just always go to the person who leads the league in points. I do agree that I absolutely think that there's room for nuance in picking who wins the Hart Trophy. It like, because Nick mentioned, like, well, that's what the Art Ross Trophy is for, right? It literally objectively goes to the point leader, and he's absolutely 100% right. Like, it's...
Well, and that's part of what I was getting at when I said there's only been one defenseman the last, like, 50 years. That's won the Hart. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Like, is it...
I don't know,
is
right?
it the case that there's never... Like, Nick Lidstrom was never the best player... sorry. Nick Lidstrom was never the most valuable player to his team.
Yeah.
Right? Is that... Yeah. Or Ray Bork or something like that?
We're going to transition now to the Norris Trophy. The James Norris Memorial Trophy, I believe as it is called in full. It is an annual award given to the defenseman who demonstrates throughout the season the greatest all-around ability in the position. And that, I think that's a key thing to remember about this trophy. Because obviously when we talk about who's the best defenseman in hockey, that is a very difficult question to answer. And, the trophy is not just the league's best defenseman. It does try to narrow it down to some extent to the greatest all-around ability. This one is really tough. There are a lot of guys who've won this who I think deserve it. There are a lot of guys who have won it that probably deserved it in different seasons than when they won it. There are guys who probably should have more, and we're especially recently, because Nick Lidstrom won, I believe, 7 Norris trophies, and Bobby Orr won 8. So there have been eras in the NHL where the trophy has been dominated by one individual, which may have led into what goes on nowadays, where almost at all costs we don't see back-to-back winners of the Norris Trophy. It feels
it's very rare.
And again, not that there should be some one guy winning it all the time.
To me, this is the most narrative-based award. I remember the year where Drew Doughty won it, and Drew Doughty's an amazing defenseman.
He deserves to have, and this is the key. He deserves to have a Norris Trophy.
That's the thing. He deserves to have a Norris Trophy, absolutely. Did he deserve it in 15-16? Maybe. I don't know. Like, I remember the year beforehand, he was like, I'd have to look this up, but he was like not even close to winning it, right?
And I think
Carlson won it hands down.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the next year he like has a similar year, but then he's the winner that year. And you read things writers put out there like, oh, Doughty's having such an amazing year, and it's almost like they're setting the stage for the guy to win the Norris that year because it's his turn basically. It's because he should have one. Doughty should have one, so therefore, we're going to make it so basically.
Yeah.
Like you just look at the voting year to year, you'll see that it's based heavily on. I'm not saying a lifetime achievement award because that's not entirely fair.
No.
Unless you're Lidstrom's last Norris. Probably should have gone to Weber. But.
Well, he was. I remember Lidstrom was spectacular that year, but he was -2. And again, not that we value plus minus all that much, but there were a lot of people wondering why they were giving the Norris Trophy to a minus defenseman. I think he had like 60-some points though in that season, Nick Lidstrom.
Right.
I think they had gotten very comfortable with giving the trophy to him, so.
It's not really controversial, and that's the thing, right? Like, well, Doughty is a great defense. I don't mean to just go after Doughty, but like
Brent Burns won it in a year where I think Carlson, it was the year, and again, it's not fair to like point out playoff success and all this, but that was the year that the Senators went to the Game 7 of the third round, and most of what people remember about Carlson that year is what happened in the playoffs, but he was his usual spectacular self in the regular season. And again, it's not that Burns shouldn't have won it over him, because Burns had, I'm pretty sure, the best year of his career that year,
right?
If not one of the best years of his career. But Burns won that trophy in January when they were saying that he's going to win it,
right?
And Doughty, I mean, you were just talking about Doughty. I'm pretty sure you told me once he won that in October. It was like going into the season.
I remember watching it in October of that year.
This is the year he wins the Norris.
Yeah.
Okay, if it's decided, then.
Yeah, it's like, he's winning it this year because you can just tell.
Yeah.
Like, all the writers who vote on the award, right, they started ramping up the narrative. I know narrative is the most overused word of this episode, but that's what it is, right? It's like, it's time for this guy to win. And I was like, he's going to win the Norris this year.
I'm just picturing the Rick and Morty clip where... and Taylor, I know you don't watch a ton of Rick and Morty, but where Morty's, it's a meme where Morty's dad is cloned like 8 times and they're all shaking each other's hands, and that's kind of what I picture with the writers that year, where at the beginning of the year they're like, this is the year that Doughty wins the Norris, and at the end of the year they give it to him and they're like, the prophecy is fulfilled, and they all just pat each other on the back and shake each other's hands.
Yeah.
Aside from all that, like aside from the narrative stuff, the big question is who deserves to win the Norris Trophy? Just like Not just like which player this year based on the narrative, but like what is the type of defenseman that is supposed to be winning this award? It depends on who you ask, but there are a lot of people who feel that the trophy is generally biased toward offensive defensemen.
Totally.
I think that's a fair point to make. I'm a fairly firm believer that a lot of these elite offensive defensemen are also pretty good defensively, and again, that sounds like a really sort of vague statement, but these are guys that they're controlling the puck. Part of the reason why they're generating so many points is because the puck's on their stick all the time, and they're not getting hemmed into their own end. I get where it's tricky though, because you have defensemen who are. We mentioned in when we were talking about the Carolina Hurricanes in the last episode, I briefly brought up Jacob Slavin, who is, like I said, has become kind of the new age model for the all-around defenseman. And, assuming his offensive production, climbs or continues at like a pretty solid rate, because he's like, over the course of a full season, he's a 40-point defenseman at this point, who is also leading the league in defensive point shares, which is pretty impressive. And, he's a good puck mover, he's a good skater. Maybe this is the type of guy, maybe he's going to get himself a Norris one of these days. Maybe, I don't know if it'll be a year he deserves it, but, maybe he's an example of the type of defenseman that a lot of people feel should be recognized with this trophy, and that it's leaned too much. It becomes like this sort of points race between a number of good offensive defensemen, and it goes to one of them. Like last year, I almost forgot that Yossi won it when Carlson was on pace for 90 points at one point last season. So,
wow.
Yeah. Carlson's production declined a bit. He finished point per game, though. I think he had 70 points.
Really?
I think so.
Wow.
Yossi had 60. This isn't to discredit Yossi, right? Again, we talked about there's got to be some nuance with these awards. It doesn't have to go to the player, especially now that Norris doesn't have to go to the player who leads the league in points. I certainly feel that Carlson should have a few more under his belt.
Carlson should probably have 4.
Yeah. And now he may never win another based on the way his career has kind of gone.
And that's why you talk about legacy.
Yeah.
Like, Carlson's one of the best defensemen of all time. I don't know if he's top 10 or top 20 or whatever, but for a guy to win 2 Norrises versus 4, that's a pretty big difference.
That's a big difference.
Right?
That's a different class.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's why it's frustrating when you see, and I just looked it up now, and I got the years mixed up. It was the year after Doughty won. Then he finished 7th.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so he's just not that great anymore, or something.
Yeah, they got him what they wanted to get him, and then they just cast him aside.
Yeah, he got 3% of the vote.
And again, we were talking about how these things matter for the Hall. Like, you have to have the hardware to get in there. It is like this self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like, well, how's this guy gonna get to the Hall if he doesn't have his trophy?
Exactly.
Well, it's like, and again, it's not the writers putting people into the Hall, but it's like, it's you people, you NHL folk, who have made it this weird requirement. Not literally a requirement, but the Hall of Fame likes to see hardware. You don't have to have it, and it doesn't have to be a certain amount of it. But they really like to see it, and it may be the difference between you getting in or not in a certain year or in general. Your eligibility never expires, if I remember correctly, for the Hall of Fame.
No.
So, maybe every player.
This is why Rogi Vachon made it in after 31 years or whatever.
Again, we can do a whole episode on the Hall of Fame and talk about maybe why Pierre Turgeon isn't in the Hall of Fame or something like that. But, so, you're worried about guys not having the hardware. Why does that matter? It matters because their legacy. But why does it have to, why does everybody have to get their share?
It's his time. It's his turn. It's his turn,
right? Yeah. I like the idea of there being a spread, but an earned spread. Oh wow, look how many great defensemen there were, just who all deserved this trophy over 10 years. If there's a guy who should have won it 6 times in a row, then give that guy the trophy 6 times in a row. It's like, imagine if they played Coy. We just talked about the Hart Trophy and everything, but imagine if they played Coy with Gretzky in the 80s, and they're just like, yeah, he won it last year. It's just like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. We're sick of him.
Are we afraid to honor, give repeat honors? Are we afraid to acknowledge that this guy really did dominate everybody else? He's the best, and he's the best this year. He's the best next year. He's just is all the time. And currently, there isn't a defenseman who is that. Especially in my opinion with Carlson having declined a bit. I personally, I hope his health kind of has turned around and he rediscovers that game-breaking ability that he had on the Senators. I think Hedman is that guy right now. We're talking about a guy who's 60 to 70 points a year.
And just won the Conn Smythe.
Just won the Conn Smythe too. Physical presence, good skater, good puck mover. I don't know, who wouldn't want, we talked about would you draft Hedman or Tavares today? And that is a good discussion.
Yeah.
That's not an easy answer. There was a time when that draft happened, I remember hearing all this talk, will the Isles take Hedman or Tavares? And that was, at the time, it was pure media, frenzy.
Yeah,
they had to make a story.
Yeah.
But fast forward 11 years, and that's a discussion now. You could take Hedman over Tavares.
I would take Hedman. I think he's probably the best defenseman in the NHL right now.
I would agree. I agree with that.
Conn Smythe.
So what have we? Yeah, let's talk about the Conn Smythe next. So next up, we have the Conn Smythe Trophy, an annual award given to the most valuable player for his team in the playoffs. The winner is selected by the Professional Hockey Writers Association at the conclusion of the final game, the Stanley Cup Final.
So the one thing I will say about that is it's voted on by the Professional Hockey Writers Association, but I think it's only voted on by 15 voters or writers who are in the rink at the conclusion of the last game. It's not like the other awards that have hundreds of writers voting on it.
Right.
Okay. So that is, I think, an important difference, because just a few votes can change one vote can change the outcome entirely, which isn't really all that possible or likely for the Hart Trophy, let's say. And that's happened before. I remember in 2016 when Crosby won it, there was a writer who was a Toronto-based writer who said, I can't remember who it was, but he said openly he left Kessel off of his ballot. And had he voted for Kessel, Kessel would have won.
Freaking Toronto media, man.
Yeah. So that's a lot of power in terms of... And I'm not saying Crosby didn't deserve to win it. I would have voted for Kessel in that playoffs, I think. I mean, that was like 5 years ago now. But that's pretty important. And also, it's the only award in... like playoff award in North American sports that's given for the entirety of the playoffs, not just the championship series or game, which I think is pretty cool.
I think that's fine. It's its own thing.
There's a recency bias in terms of the last couple rounds and the final and what like in 2014, and I like Drew Doughty. I ripped on him enough, so I'll say in 2014 I thought Doughty should have won, and in fact he would have won if the Kings won Game 4, because the way that Conn Smythe is voted on is it's in the second intermission of every potential elimination game, right? Mm-hmm. So the Kings were up 3-0 in that series, could have won the cup in Game 4. They voted on the Conn Smythe at the second intermission. Drew Doughty would have been the winner had the Kings won the cup. The Rangers won that game, then went on to win Game 5. They voted again in the second intermission of Game 5, and it was Justin Williams that won it. Right? So, and Justin Williams in Game 5, I think he had a goal or something like that. So, like, was that enough to tip the scales? I guess you could argue that. Like, it was an elimination game and he scored a big goal. But, I don't know.
I'm almost kind of surprised that Doughty was initially going to win it, because there was so much talk that playoff run about Justin Williams being clutch. Like, I remember you heard so much about him being so clutch in Game 7, so clutch in the playoffs. They were talking about Justin Williams all playoffs long, so I'm almost surprised that he didn't just have it locked, even though Doughty may have deserved it more than him just through that alone. I'm surprised that he wasn't always just kind of their guy, you know what I mean? But he had an overtime winner, I think, Justin Williams, in Game 1 or Game 2, I think it was, of the Stanley Cup Final as well. So, but regardless, it is interesting. Kopitar was also probably a good candidate to win.
From what I remember, Kopitar in the first couple rounds was the favorite, or one of the favorites, and then kind of tailed off a little bit. And
again, that's how, like you're saying, recency bias. Like, if you have a good 3 rounds, but maybe a not so good Stanley Cup Final.
At the same time, it is recency bias, but at the same time, the fourth round, like the Stanley Cup Final, is more important. How you perform is more important than how you perform in the first round.
And I mean, if you're trying to decide between 2 guys and one of them was better in the final than the other, maybe it makes more sense to pick the guy who was better in the final.
Yeah.
So, I'll say that I generally don't disagree with who's picked. I don't typically take issue with it. You know, some people talked about, Binnington should have won the Conn Smythe last year. In 2019, pardon me, what I've always said about Binnington's performance in those playoffs is that when they needed to win, he was their guy, and he was excellent. Like, after a loss, his record was like, I think 9-1 or 10-1. But his overall, he had a 914 or 915 save percentage in those playoffs, which is just not good enough to win the Conn Smythe. We can talk about his legacy. It's there. It's just like, he was when they needed to win, he was their guy, and he was spectacular when they needed him to be. Is he their playoff MVP? No, not in my opinion. Ryan O'Reilly 100% deserved to win the Conn Smythe that year. But when a goalie wins it, it's got to be like, a Tim Thomas, or like Jonathan Quick putting up a 940 save percentage, or Cam Ward won it in 2006. Some people felt that Eric Stahl should have won it, and there was a lot of buzz about Cam Ward as a rookie leading that Hurricanes team to the promised land. 920 save percentage is good. It's not.
So there's two, and this is not exactly related, but kind of as a transition, 2 of the awards you just mentioned, Crosby in 16 and Ward in 06. 2 candidates that you didn't mention are Logan Couture and Chris Pronger.
Right.
Who were both excellent players on the losing
teams, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on a player? What does a player have to do on a losing team? Because it's very rare. The last time it's happened was like almost 20 years ago with J.S. Giguère. So, like, it's almost as if you can be the best player in the playoffs, but if you're on the losing team, you're not going to win unless you did something so unbelievable that they're forced to give you the award.
So I'll say right off the bat, they shouldn't be ineligible. Like, a losing team player should be eligible for playoff MVP. They absolutely should be. Should, not shouldn't. Should. Right. So in 2011, for example, Tim Thomas wins that Conn Smythe Trophy, no matter the outcome of Game 7.
You think so?
That's what I believe would have happened.
Yeah.
It's also what I would have agreed with. And part of that is because of how that series went. Like, if the Canucks God willing, God help me, had won that series in 4 or 5 games, like, God forbid a sweep, right? But like if they had won that series quickly, even if Thomas had kept his like stats good, like let's say he didn't like fall apart in any games or anything, it would have been hard for them to give it to him if he didn't prolong the series.
Right.
I don't know who it would have gone to. Like let's say maybe Luongo or if Burrows kept scoring game winners or something. That Canucks team had a spread of players that had their good series, like the Sedins.
Kessler, maybe.
Kessler had Kessler. I think he was too hurt to do anything in the Stanley Cup final, but he carried the team through Nashville. The Sedins had like 12 points a pop against the Sharks, but nobody had continuously demonstrated like dominance for that team. So there was no one guy.
There was no clear-cut favorite.
And by the time that series went to 7 games, it was pretty obvious that there was no one player on that Canucks team that you could call like the playoff MVP when Tim Thomas played the way he did.
Right.
If we don't count Game 7, the guy had, I think, he'd given up 8 goals in those 6 games, and he only ended up giving up 8 in 7 because he was shut out in friggin' Game 7. But so in 2011, I think Thomas deserved to and would have won that trophy no matter what happened in Game 7 of that series. Giguère winning in 2003. I know there's some controversy with that because I think you told me that Brodeur had 3 shutouts in that series or something like that.
Yeah, he did actually, including Game 7.
The thing, I guess, with that is that if they had given it, I'm sure there was a lot of narrative that a lot of people would have been upset if Giguère didn't win the Conn Smythe that year because he literally carried the Anaheim Ducks.
That's part of the thing too, is that when I say you have to do something so spectacular. Going into the playoffs in 2003, nobody expected the mighty Ducks of Anaheim
Red Wings
to beat Detroit, let alone sweep them.
They swept them. They Columbus Blue Jacketed them
before the Blue Jackets
even were good.
Yeah.
And I believe they swept Minnesota as well, and he gave up I think 2 goals in that series or something. I don't know. You'd have to check my math on that, but he was like
didn't hurt
ridiculous.
That he looked like the Michelin Man with his pads, but that's the era that was. So,
but hey, Brodeur.
And then
Brodeur was playing, even though he didn't have like the big pads. Brodeur had the same like capability, like he was allowed to do the same thing. So guys did what they wanted. But so
it must have been going into that Game 7 that the writers were just like, Giguère's winning it no matter the outcome of this game.
Well,
the Devils won 3-0.
It was. And he was absolutely ridiculous. And I think that they should obviously be eligible. I think that more is required of a losing winner than would be required of this is a weird phrase, a winning winner. So if the leading scorer on the Stanley Cup winning team has 24 points and the leading scorer on the losing team has 31 points, which is kind of what happened with like Couture versus Crosby.
Yeah, well, didn't Crosby have like 21
He had 19 points. 19? I believe. Maybe 21.
And Couture had 30?
Or maybe Kane had
32?
19 in 2013. And then, Couture was approaching 30. And he led the whole playoffs in goals too, I think. So that, again, that's tough, but it's just not quite gargantuan enough. I don't know. Like it's not an objective thing. It has to be something really special. For sure.
And so then the other thing I want to mention about the Conn Smythe is that we're talking about the Hart Trophy. It's very rare that a goalie wins. It's very rare a defenseman wins it, and it's the most valuable player to his team.
Yeah.
And we've gone over this, right? But that's what the criteria is. Well, it's the similar criteria in the playoffs, but you see goalies win it way more often than the Hart. You see defensemen win it, right? I think it's a better representation of who actually is the best player or most valuable player to that team than the Hart Trophy is, if that makes sense, right? Why can't a defenseman be the most valuable to his team? Why can't a goalie?
Yeah.
And maybe it's because in the playoffs, goalies play. If starting goalie should be playing every game, should be playing every game that the team plays throughout the playoffs for the most part.
Typically,
right?
yeah.
If you're going to win the Conn Smythe, whereas in the playoffs, whereas in the playoffs or in the regular season rather. Guy might play 55 games or 60 games, only playing like 2/3 or 3/4 of the team's games.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why it is. But I think that the Conn Smythe, if they do want to say it's most valuable player to his team, I think it's awarded more fairly than the Hart is. The one that I remember the most in terms of, it wasn't even controversial per se, but it was a little bit. Was 2007 when Scott Niedermayer won it.
Oh, right.
So Chris Pronger, by all accounts, pretty much should have won the Conn Smythe that year. Like he was the best player on the Ducks in the playoffs and most valuable, blah, blah, whatever you want to say.
He was the guy, yeah.
He was the go-to guy, but he got suspended twice. And so it was considered like it would be a bad look if they gave the playoff MVP to a guy that got suspended twice.
Well, to be fair, twice, right? Like, literally 2 times in the same playoff run. Like, dude.
Right. So Niedermayer won it, and it's not to say he was a weak winner necessarily, but I think it was clear to a lot of people that it was because Pronger had been suspended.
Well, that Ducks team didn't really have a guy, like a one offensive dynamo. It was like that team was a tough team.
I've heard Ducks fans say like if it wasn't Pronger or Niedermayer, it could have been like Sammy Paulson, which like no offense to Samuel Paulson, but that kind of shows that was a strong team. And like and the Senators in contrast had like, you know, Heatley, Alfredson, and Spezza were putting up like Conn Smythe numbers. Like they were all in the 20s, I believe, when that playoff concluded. Alfredson would have been their guy. Like if the Senators had found a way to, and I can't imagine a universe in the world where the Senators would have turned that series around, because that Ducks team was winning that Stanley Cup, in my opinion. But if the Senators had found a way to turn it around, it would have been Alfredson. I believe he scored twice in that 6-2 loss in game 5. Alfredson had 2, and I think Chris Phillips had 1, right?
Or maybe they did. Or did they get a third goal? Oh no! Oh, sorry, Ottawa. Yeah. So yeah, that's the Conn Smythe Trophy. Unless you have
I think for the most part, it's for as much as I dislike the Hart for being the most valuable player to the team and all this kind of stuff. The Conn Smythe is a similar criteria, but it seems to be awarded more fairly, or it seems to be like less controversial in who is winning it.
Playoffs are just different. It's just different.
Yeah, it's a different beast, right? Yeah. And you know,
the NHL,
you can see a guy who is like a Justin Williams who isn't going to be in the Hall of Fame, but if he steps up, if he has a really good 2 months or a really good 2 weeks, it could be in the last 2 rounds of the playoffs. Guy can win that, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And I think the writers are less concerned about legacy with the Conn Smythe, because the whole hockey world is watching these playoffs, and we know, watching TV, we know who the best guy is out there. Like, maybe not literally, but like, we know they can't pick somebody who they think deserves a Conn Smythe, because they're like, this guy is the guy.
Yeah,
we can all see it. Like Ryan O'Reilly.
Stamkos, it's time to win the Conn Smythe.
I think about I always when I watch. I've watched the 2019 Stanley Cup final a bit, because it was a great final. Like, it was really entertaining. Game 4 is like when Ryan O'Reilly physically embodies the Conn Smythe winner. Like, if you watch those highlight clips, he scored twice, first of all, but he also has this play where it's honestly, he doesn't score on it, but he comes up the ice 1-on-1, takes a slap shot, and then basically strong arms his way past the defenseman to one hand whack the rebound, and he almost scores on the play. And he just looks, this is a man possessed. This is a man who's like, come on, boys, we're fucking going for it. Right? So, like, I that's what I think when I think of, like, people are watching this and they know who's supposed. They have a pretty good idea of who should be winning this trophy. So don't screw it up. The Hart Trophy is like, we're just watching. We catch some highlights. We're keeping track of the stats.
We go to bed at 9:30 Eastern time, so we don't get to see a lot of the guys that play.
Yeah, Toronto. Anyway,
that's pretty well it, I guess, for trophies.
I think
apart from the Art Ross, which is
I'll go through the trophies. Yeah, I'll talk about the trophies we didn't discuss, because they don't really like the President's Trophy. Like, it's an objective trophy. It goes to the team who leads the league in points. The Wales and the Campbell trophies are just conference final winners, and we kind of already discussed who we think is going to the Stanley Cup final. So again, very objective trophy. The Art Ross, as you mentioned, points leader. There's not much to say there.
As well as the Maurice Richard.
Yeah, Maurice Richard, goal leader. Relatively, actually, one thing worth talking about that quickly is just how recent that trophy came about. Yeah. Like, they just decided not to award a trophy to the player who leads the league in goals. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, or as I mentioned, there's no trophy for leading the league in assists.
Which I think there should be.
I do too.
Yeah.
It's a primary stat. It's half, like, points are goals and assists.
Apparently the only reason that there is a Rocket Richard trophy is because the Habs donated it to the NHL. It wasn't like the NHL took the initiative to
award a trophy to the goal scorer.
The Habs are just like, well, let's honor Maurice Richard somehow. He was a great goal scorer.
Well, he was the first guy to get 500 goals. Like he's the first.
He's the first to score 50.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that if it was to be named after somebody, I think it should be named after Maurice Richard, because it's a great historical, like, sort of icon to base goals off of.
Right.
There were guys before him that were also really good at scoring, and there are obviously guys after him that scored more. But Richard is like the guy you think of when you think of like the template for the goal scorer, going into the almost going into the expansion.
Right.
What should the assist trophy be named? I mean, there's one guy in particular who had a.
I know you want to name the assist trophy after Henrik Sedin. It's not gonna happen. No. Okay, so maybe part of it is it okay to name awards after living people, right? I think that's okay, but at the same time, maybe somewhat weird.
I mean, Gretzky leads the league in points with assists alone.
Well, part of some of these awards that are named after the people that donated them.
Yeah.
Like I believe James Norris donated the trophy, and so it was just named after him.
Right.
Lady Byng, same thing. She donated the trophy.
Stanley Cup.
Well, of course, yeah.
It was. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't always referred to as just the Stanley Cup, though. It was called, I believe, the Challenge Cup.
It was the Dominion Challenge Cup.
Yeah. So,
I think what would be really smart to do is create 4 new trophies, one for each of the division winners at the end of the season. So the Pacific would be the Wayne Gretzky Trophy. You could have the Central, the Gordie Howe, Metro, Mario Lemieux, Atlantic, Bobby Orr. Have trophies named after them because, of course, 32 teams. The average team is going to win a Stanley Cup once every 32 years. Okay, so it's very rare that a team wins the Stanley Cup. An individual team wins the Stanley Cup, right? So it's like you have to kind of do things that are going to make other successes relevant too, right? Like winning a division, you're competing against more teams to win a division than teams that won the Stanley Cup back in the 50s and 60s were competing against. Right. They're competing against 6 teams. Yeah. Right? So winning a division should actually matter. It should actually be like a big thing. And having a trophy to go along with that, I think, would be kind of cool. And you could name those after, legend, the 4 kind of Mount Rushmore-esque players.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
And again, the players will take it how they will. They'll be like, "Oh, neat," or whatever, right?
And there's a lot of fans that won't care. There's a lot of fans that hear that suggestion that I just made, and they're like, "Why does that matter? It's the cup or bust." And it's like, really, like,
why do you have to be so obtuse about it?
Yeah.
It's like, just have
look at how baseball. If you win the division in baseball, it's like a huge thing.
Yeah, at least they celebrate like every level of
which it gets over the top. I'm not saying that. Okay, you win the Pacific Division, therefore you have to get in the locker room with champagne and whatnot. But like, why not have a little pride in the successes that your team has?
Promote your league. Promote your league.
Winning and your history. Like, winning a division should actually be a big thing. Winning a conference championship. I mean, you kind of skimmed over the Clarence Campbell and the Prince of Wales trophies. Yeah. Why is that not a big thing in hockey?
They don't even want to touch them.
Why did people make fun of... And I know it's like a meme that the Predators put up a banner for winning the Western Conference. It's like, why is that a meme? They were first in the conference.
They were the Western Conference champions.
Right? Like, it's not... And this is kind of separate, but it's not weird to put up a banner for winning your division, but it is weird to put up a banner for winning your conference.
Right.
Like, isn't it harder to win your conference than it is your division?
Yeah.
Right?
You're talking about the playoffs, right? Winning the conference final.
Well, no, they didn't. The Predators put up a banner for winning. Like, they were first in the West one year.
Oh.
Yeah, and they put up a banner for that, and people made fun of them for it because no other team does it. But it's like, why shouldn't they celebrate? Like, that's cool. Like, they won. They were the best team out of 15 other teams.
I mean, it's literally for the fans in the building to look at anyway. Like, it's up there. It's just like look what we did. And the fans are like, yeah, that's it. That's all it really is. Like, and people want this like uniformity to it, and it's like, let them just like promote their team the way they want to do it. Like, as long as it's legitimate, as long as they actually earned what they earned. Yeah. If they're going to start putting up like finished third in the conference, obviously, but they're not going to do that.
But then they're not going to. No one's suggesting that. Though.
No.
It's just like, you were first in your division or your conference. That's cool.
Yeah.
And I think there should be a trophy for that, because why not? Why is it just like, oh, okay, well, we were first. Well, whatever. Not a big deal. We want to win the cup. Of course, everyone wants to win the cup. But there are other things than just, the Stanley Cup, which is the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
But kind of rambling.
Well, yeah, the NHL is kind of unique in its singular approach to the one trophy, right? Like the other sports and leagues, like I think in soccer, obviously you want to win like the Premier League, but it's like, hey, look where we finished in the end of the Premier League season. That's pretty good. We had a pretty good year.
Well, then there's the UEFA and there's like the Champions League, and then
there's so much more to consider in those. Like in hockey, it's like, did you win the cup?
Yeah. Well, then it doesn't matter. Like, really?
Yeah.
So
and it's crushing. And if you didn't win the cup, it's like, what's wrong with this team? You know what I mean? Like that discussion that doesn't happen the same way. Like in other sports, it's just like,
I think it'd be fun too if they did have trophies for the divisions. Obviously, for the Kings and the Oilers to win the Gretzky, that's awesome because he played for those teams. But then the Flames can win the Gretzky, and that would like get under the skin of people, or the Canucks or whatever. So, or the Habs could win the Bobby Orr Trophy.
Yeah.
Right, and maybe that wouldn't matter. I don't know, but
well, we won't know until it's tried, right?
Something
like,
to consider.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt the league to do it. It won't cost them anything other than making the trophy and like doing a little piece.
It would probably be like the Enterprise Gordie Howe Memorial Trophy, and the Bridgestone Bobby Orr Trophy. But that's beside the point.
So going back to our previous video, Stanley Cup champion. Who do you think is going to win the Stanley Cup?
I still have Tampa.
Okay, I have the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup. My runner-up is Tampa.
Nice.
Who's your runner-up?
I think I had Tampa and Colorado.
Yeah. Again, very diverse opinions on this show. Let's go. I mean, it doesn't really matter what order we go in here. Hart Trophy. I picked Connor McDavid.
I went with McDavid as well.
Art Ross, I assumed would also be Connor McDavid.
Yeah.
The Mercer Chard Trophy. I picked Austin Matthews. This is the goal leader trophy, as we discussed a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I went with Ovechkin.
Yeah, I think those are the two guys I think right now who are the best candidates.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Pasternak has been looking pretty good, and he's only been playing 3 games, but
that's true. I shouldn't. I mean, obviously he missed some time, but I shouldn't go into a season thinking that Pasternak.
Ovechkin also missed 4 games too.
Yeah, for different reasons. Called the trophy, I picked Alexis Lafreniere, which again, like, not a lot of people are going to like bat an eyelash at that pick. The season's gone on for 3 weeks now, and I don't think he's looked that great.
No, I think Stützle is the big candidate in Ottawa. He's been really good.
What about Kaprizov in Minnesota?
Yeah, he's on the radar for sure as well.
Yeah, a bit of a Panarin because he's a little older, but he's not as old, I think, as Panarin was. Yeah, a lot of people would have picked Lafreniere. I don't think a lot of people would have expected him.
I did pick him as well.
Yeah. Norris Trophy, I picked Victor Hedman.
Yeah, same.
Kind of in keeping with our entire discussion earlier. Vezina, I picked Andrei Vasilevsky.
Vezna's so hard to pick. I kind of went. I don't know if I went on a limb. I think other people had Carter Hart, but I went with Hart.
I think that's. I like that. It's like an optimist. It's an optimist pick.
Yeah. It's. I think it was from a position of like, I want him to do well because I'm cheering for Team Canada this time a year from now. So.
Well, we don't really know. Part of the reason why the Vezina is hard this year is because we're not sure how all the goalies are going to be deployed this year. Like when it's all said and done. Like how many guys that normally would play 60% of the season are going to actually split the net with their backup because they're trying to is this like compressed? It's shorter season, but it's compressed. Do we want to give goalies more rest than they would normally get in terms of actual games played so that they're ready for the playoffs? You know, which is kind of like what it's not dissimilar from what teams are doing in normal seasons anyway. So. You don't really know how much time certain goalies are going to get. Like, are Rask and Halak just going to share the net?
And the other part, and this is more than just the Vezina, for all the awards, this might be the most controversial year for awards because teams are only playing in their division, right? They're not playing outside the division.
Yeah.
And we don't know how many games some teams are going to play. Obviously, they're aiming for 56. I think the Canadian division looks like they'll play all 56.
So far, so
There's
good.
some in the States, though, that they might only play 48 games, or they might play 50 games, or something. So the numbers are going to be a little bit different, and so that's going to skew things. It's like not only is it only division based, they may not even have the same number of games played between divisions.
Yeah. And I'm sure part of that will depend on like how the standings are shaping up. Like if they deem some games to be unnecessary, then they may just scrap them from the schedule altogether. I don't think there are a whole lot of teams that are shaping up to be so out of the picture that that's going to happen like a lot. I feel like it's going to be a close race. Like
what I'm getting at though is like if they're so the Art Ross most likely one of McDavid or Draisaitl is probably going to run away with it. But let's say, just for argument's sake, let's say that there's a guy on an American team who his team plays 50 games and he loses out on the Art Ross by 3 points.
Yeah.
You know,
that matters.
People are going to say, well, that's not legitimate. Now, I think probably McDavid or Draisaitl's or Marner or somebody, they'll probably win it going away. But what if that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Will people look at that Art Ross and say, well, that's illegitimate? Or will they look at the Hart or the Richard or something? Matthews wins the Richard by 2 goals, and and Pasternak, for example.
I think he
missed time anyway. But
I think it's kind of like what you were saying with the lines on the billboard, connecting the dots and everything, where it's like people are just gonna have to accept a simplified explanation this year for things. It's just like, they didn't play as many games, so he didn't get the Art Ross, and it's like that really sucks. But that's just how it went. We had a season. We had a season. Like we made the season happen. We can't do anything else. Like it sucks that's how it played out. Just gonna have to accept it, and maybe watch for the Hart Trophy voting and see if that plays into it, right? But like the objective awards, it's just gonna be what it's gonna be.
Yeah.
Some guys, anyway, like the Selke Trophy, I picked Ryan O'Reilly. I don't know, like a number of guys you could pick.
I think I probably had Bergeron.
Yeah, I mean, again,
it's hard. It's just it's difficult to say.
It kind of feels like closing your eyes and throwing darts at a board or something.
I went with Connor McDavid.
Like, in terms of like, okay, so with the Selke Trophy, there were probably like 6 guys. You could pick one of them. One of them is probably going to win the Selke Trophy. Like, Bergeron. I mean, not Taves because he's hurt, but Kopitar, Bergeron, O'Reilly,
Couture,
Barkov,
or not Couture, Couturier rather.
Couturier. Barkov makes some noise every season that he deserves a
He's such an underrated player.
Yeah, that's about it. That's all I got here. Thanks for tuning in again. If you're coming back from the first time, and if not, welcome aboard to the Hockey Talkies podcast. I don't know how regularly we're going to do this, but as regularly as we want.
I think we should try and aim for once a week.
That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Hockey Talkies. I am Hunter.
I am Taylor. We love
you. Fuck
all.
off.
Beautiful.